Hey guys, this is Sidewinder here for Community Starcraft 2, and today's going to be a little different video. Today's going to be a 1-gate fast expand tutorial video, basically to show you the build order for this matchup that has really been rigorously tested by myself. So in this particular game we're going to be watching me versus a Terran player, and I'm chatting to him because he's playing random actually, so this is going to change the build just a little bit, but the concept is still the same. I'm going to explain a lot of concepts that are a lot about playing this matchup straight up in the early game, as opposed to just trying to do something like weird or goofy or like catch your opponent off guard. This is going to be the very standard way to fight a Terran player. So what we're going to see here is I'm going to be playing a guy named Bobster, who's our red Terran. He, again, plays random, and I have to place my buildings just a little differently in this video to adjust to what he's doing. So I'm going to show you a lot of different stuff about this. What I typically am going to do, I'm going to go ahead and place my pylon on 9 supply. You can see I'm at 12 right now. I'm going to scout with that probe to see where well, first off, in this game I need to see what race he is. But I typically scout at 9 anyway, so I can get in there as soon as possible. That's just me. You can scout a little later if you want to. In this particular build, I usually will chrono boost my Nexus twice before I set down my first gateway. But in this circumstance, he is playing random, so I'm not going to be that greedy. I'm just going to go for a typical 13 gateway, and it's going to drop it any second here. There it goes. And what you're going to do here is, with this scout, you want to get as much information out of the Terran player as possible, because there's little nuances to this build that need to be adjusted based upon what you scout. So in this particular circumstance, this is about the most straight up standard game I've seen, but on the ladder you see all kinds of different stuff. So I guess it's kind of good that we're going to see something a little different than normal, just because that's what happens in this game. You don't see the same stuff every game. So what you want to check out from the Terran player is how many barracks he has coming up, and most of the time it's just going to be 1, and what kind of status it's going on with his geyser. So he just has 1 geyser, and that's going to tell me exactly what I want to know. This is very standard stuff. If he had no gas, I could be a little more aggressive about attacking him a little later, or I could be a little more aggressive about putting my Nexus down earlier. But the basic point to this build is that it's going to be putting out the fastest possible Nexus that is still safe from virtually anything a Terran player is going to be bringing you, assuming that you can stay on top of your scouting. So what's going to be happening here is, when this barracks finished up, I checked around his base one last time and I ran out of there with my probe. But this probe isn't going to go home. This probe is eventually going to die just to get me information, and that's fine. Losing 1 probe is totally fine. One mistake that people commonly make is they commonly will scout with their first Zealot and their first Stalker, and against Terran in particular, especially nowadays, that's extremely risky, and I hate it. So don't do it. I'll even show you a replay later of somebody running this build and just dying because they lost their first unit or 2, and it's a really risky way to play, and you're going to get really pissed off if it happens to you, because you're going to be like, this build doesn't work. But if you're donating your first 2 units to like concussive shell marauders, then it's not the build, it's the fact that you wasted units and you should die after that. So what we're going to see here is the cybernetics core did start as soon as the gateway finished, and you also want to drop your pylon on about 16 supply. Gas is going to be at about 15. This is all really normal stuff. If you play Protoss, you should be opening like this every game anyway. So what's going to happen here is, as soon as the core is done, you're going to chrono boost out Warp Gate, and you're going to chrono boost your gateway, which is producing a Stalker. You want to rally them to this worker and kill this scout as soon as you can, which this, I don't know what that Zealot is doing, but it was rallied to this worker to begin with, and he just ran right past it. But anyway, what this is going to do, your primary objective from this point is to figure out what the Terran player is doing. It's also to figure out what, excuse me, not figure out, but it's also to deny what the Terran player knows. So as soon as the Stalker comes out, it's going to shoot this SCV. At the same time, I didn't pay too much attention to it, but I walked my SCV, or not my SCV, this is a probe. I walked it back up the ramp as soon as my Stalker started to see what I could see at the top of this ramp. And what I saw was a tech lab first coming down on his barracks, and that's going to adjust this build quite a bit. So I'll show you the reaction to tech lab first. I'll also show you the reaction to not knowing or reactor first, and that all changes the build quite a bit. So what you're going to do here, you're going to notice that I'm supply capped, and that's intentional. You're going to be on 22 probes, and the Stalker and the Zealot are going to eat up your remaining 4 supply, putting you at 26. And you're going to drop your Nexus as soon as you can push his Scout away. So your Nexus is going to go down. You're going to start a pylon here at your natural. And again, without resuming probes, you're going to drop a gateway. And you should drop your second gateway as soon as you have the minerals. Make sure you put at least one more chrono boost on this cybernetics core while you're coming back up here to set up your gateways. After this, if you scouted Tech Lab first, you're going to go Zealot and chrono boost it out. If you scouted Reactor first, you're going to put a Sentry and not chrono boost it. That's very important to do these little nuances because there's reasoning behind all this, and I'll explain it later, but just take my word for it for now if this is all you watch. So you're going to make a Zealot, chrono boost it out, and then you're going to make a Stalker and also chrono boost it out. And the reason for this is because if they go Tech Lab first, most of the time, or at least I guess the biggest situation you need to be paranoid of is a really quick Marauder push. Let's say, for example, my opponent is going for something like this, which is pretty normal. He would usually actually have another Marauder in here, but that is kind of inconsequential. So we'll go ahead and put this out. So you're going to chrono boost a Stalker. You're going to have 4 units on the field, and by the time your warp gate is finished, you should be ready to warp in for your first round of units. This is also going to be dependent on what you scouted on the first time. So your gateways are going to transform at about 6:15, sometimes a little earlier. Your Nexus is going to finish at about 6:15 as well, sometimes a little earlier once again. Going to watch our gateways transform. You also notice I dropped another pylon so that I could get my first warp in without supply blocking myself. And you also want to continue probes. There's some reasons where you can skip them if you really need to, but usually you don't need to. What I'm doing in this instance, most of the time when these gateways finish, you want to warp in 3 Stalkers if you can afford it. And there could be a whole other slew of circumstances in which you can't afford 3 Stalkers, but if you can, just warp in those 3 Stalkers, and I'll explain why in a second. I warped in 2 at my natural, and 1 back at my mineral line, just in case this Tech Lab was actually for Reapers. It wasn't, so it's better to be safe than sorry, and this 1 Stalker isn't going to be the difference between you winning and losing the battle. So what a Terran player typically wants to do in the early game is he wants to put on a little bit of barracks pressure, and he also wants to expand behind this as soon as he can. So what you're going to see in the Terran base is he actually has a command center coming up. He's going to try and land that as soon as he can, but if he's doing this and you already have your Nexus done, your Nexus should be mining almost a full minute before his command center is mining. So after this is where you start to get in the more standard plays. In this particular game, you're not going to see an engagement between my gateway units and his barracks units, just because he chooses not to press me. But you still need to respect that. You still need to understand exactly what's going on. So if you want to, you can be brave and press out. I was just checking to see if he was hanging out in front of my base, which you can do. But if these 2 armies fought straight up, he has 3 Marauders and, what's that, 7 Marines. I mean, every Terran player is going to run everything a little bit differently, but this gateway army will be able to handle this barracks army just fine. You should not lose that no matter what happens. So, yeah, that's the general gist of the opener here. After this, you're going to focus on taking your second gas as soon as you have gotten your first warp in. And if you feel safe enough and you've scouted out and you know that he's not bringing any pressure, you can go ahead and take your robotics, and after this is just going to be observers and either Colossus or Templar Tech, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to show the rest of this game. This is just the general opener. I want to talk more about the engagement between these forces though, and how to handle this engagement. I'm just going to go into a unit tester here to show you how you would typically handle that engagement from the Protoss perspective and the different kinds of things that Terran players can be bringing to you at that time in the game. Because I hear a lot of people say, if I 1-gate expand, as soon as his barracks pressure comes up, I just die. And that should never be the case, because your Zealots can live forever, and your Stalkers do fine if you just focus down important targets. So we'll get to that here in just a second. I'm going to start up that unit testing map, and we'll get into it. Okay, so welcome back. I'm going to be showing you a typical engagement between these 2 armies. There's 2 different circumstances here, and again, this army composition is only going to be if you scouted Tech Lab first. And Tech Lab first, let's just say an army composition is going to look something similar to this. I mean, it can be a million different things, but you may be a little threatened by this number of bile units versus this number of gateway units. But that's typically what it's going to come down to by the time these 2 fight. So I'm going to tell you the roles of each unit in this fight. The roles of the Marauder, if you're Terran, is to kill sentries if they have them out, and also to kill Stalkers. The role of the Marines is just to stand there and shoot stuff. The role of the Zealots here is actually just to die. You don't need these Zealots to do any damage, and if they do damage, you're going to waste them because these Zealots do a lot of damage. The role of the Stalkers is to focus down individual Marauders rather than waste their fire on Marines while Marauders are still on the field. You do not want these Marauders to ever hit your Stalkers. And the reason why that shouldn't happen is because your two Zealots are going to tank damage for a long time, and by that time your Stalkers are going to remove so much Marauder DPS that he's going to have nothing left in his push. So I'm going to attack move these two armies the best I possibly can. I'm going to micro these units like you would normally see in a fight, and show you exactly how everything needs to be handled. So what they're going to typically try to do is they're going to try to kite so they don't actually get hit by your Zealots. I know I'm taking just a little bit of damage, but look, I've already removed two Marauders there. And if they just straight up attack each other, this is what you should have left on the field. So this is normally the kind of stuff that you're going to see, and I want you guys to be brave if you're running this build. You need to run it fast. You need to know what your units do, and you need to be confident in their ability to do it. If you just regular attack move into all that stuff and you're not prioritizing killing Marauders, then they might actually kill you right there, or you might lose a ton of probes, and that's the common complaint that I hear from a lot of people. But rest assured, if you run the build like I just showed you in that last video, and you handle your army the way I just showed you here, you really shouldn't lose any of those engagements. Let's show you what it would look like if you scouted something different. This is the other unit composition that you can have by this point in the game if you're fighting like a reactor first. So the previous ones for Tech Lab first, if they made a reactor, your unit order is going to be Zealot, Stalker, Sentry, and you're going to chrono boost your Warp Gate tech a lot more heavily so that you get 3 Stalkers on Warp in as soon as possible. And typically the army that you're going to fight in this in the circumstance is about, let's say, 7 Marines, 2 Marauders. And they may be a little more than this and maybe a little less than this depending on the time in the game and depending on your own skill level. But this is the composition I see very, very often against this, and I usually just wipe the floor with it. And you should do it yourself if you're targeting everything down correctly. This is not a hard fight, but a lot of people are scared to make this fight, and they're not confident in their gateway units, but you need to be confident in yours and be confident in your ability to handle this battle correctly. So I'm going to try to do the same thing. Your Sentry's role here is not for Force Field. Your Sentry's role here is just for Guardian Shield. And that's just to keep this one Zealot alive for longer, because in this circumstance you're not going to have 2 Zealots, you're only going to have 1. And I will find a replay in which I do the order of Zealot, Stalker, Sentry, and chrono boost a little longer if it's necessary. I actually think that's pretty self-explanatory, whereas the order for Tech Lab first, if you scouted that, was Zealot, Stalker, and then 3 Stalkers on your Warp-In. So if this is a little confusing, I have a whole written guide on it. I'll show you guys a little later. But we're going to go ahead and attack these armies again. Once again, you want to target down Marauders if you possibly can, because that's the most important thing. And if you also can help it, try to just micro stuff back that might die. Don't let it die if you can help it. But yeah, I mean, you should still have a lot of stuff on the field. Your Nexus is going to be earlier. You're safe from pretty much anything he's going to do, assuming you keep up on your scouting. In my guide, I have a lot of different circumstances that you can run into, and a lot of different follow-ups. I'm just going to explain concepts to you really quickly, and I'm going to show you evidence that even pros players don't run this correctly, and they die to stupid things when they shouldn't be dying to that. So yeah, we'll get to that in just a second, but what you want to make sure of is that if you're keeping up on your scouting, you need to know what he's doing. You need to know if he's expanded, you need to know what kind of units he has on the field, and you need to know how aggressively you can lay down the rest of your tech. If you just go for those 3 gateways, like these, like you would normally have in that build, if you immediately go like, okay, I need this, and I need this, and I need a forge to start upgrading, if he attacks you right then, you just spent all this money on stuff that's not units, and you might die. So you need to know exactly what he's doing and not just throw a whole bunch of stuff down. If he is doing something like a 1 base all-in, you can respond to that in many different ways. A lot of people like Immortals, a lot of people like Charge. You can get out whatever you want from that point, but you need to kind of understand how to handle your units in this circumstance, and more importantly, get this Nexus established. And that's as far as I'm really going to take you in this opener, because there's a lot of different things that can go with it. So let me show you a replay of Huck running a 1-gate expansion and dying because he was irresponsible with this build and kind of shed some light on everything else that should be going on in this build really quickly, so I'll be right back. Okay, so as promised here, we're going to watch Huck versus the STC. This is from MLG Orlando 2011, and I'm going to show you a bunch of mistakes that Huck makes and why he dies when he runs this, and how you should not make these same mistakes. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not better than pro players. If I was, I'd be out making money winning events like Huck did at this one. But I know when pro players screw up, and I know how to fix those problems so that you guys don't make those same mistakes. One of the worst habits you can get in this game is going out and watching pro players play, and watching pro players play at their level and expect everything to work the same on your level. I'm building this one gate fast expand build to suit you as a player, not to suit a pro player or whatever. This is to suit you. It's the most safe and aggressive way to do it that you can be safe and get away with. So what we're going to watch here is Huck going for something a little bit differently. He goes for his gateway actually on 12. And then he's going to scout out the STC, and I'll show you where the mistakes are made in this opener. So Huck is going to scout out and see really nothing so far. Nothing all that memorable is going to be happening. Second pylon going down, whatever. But what Huck makes the mistake of, he makes two mistakes, and I'll point them out as they come along. Huck is going to get really greedy here, and it's going to be bad because the STC has a barracks at his front door. He's also proxying a barracks. And this goes along with everything I preach about this build. This build protects you from basically everything if you know what you're scouting. So Huck does not know what he's scouting in this situation, and it sucks that he got caught in this position, but there's a couple of things you can do to prevent this from happening. Number one, you're going to notice Huck is not starting a zealot, and that is a terrible idea. You never ever want to skip your zealot if you're running a one gate fast expand, because why are the zealots there? They are there to die. And if you don't have something there to die, guess what's going to die? It's your stuff that's meant to kill other stuff. So if your zealot dies, then all your stalkers are not going to be able to get the damage that they want off. The marauders are going to be hitting the stalkers, which you never want, and you're going to lose. That's just what's going to happen. So what the STC is going to be doing, this is a pretty standard 2 racks, but the second barracks is proxied like we were talking about before. This is going to be a tech lab, and he's going to go for slow marauders. And since Huck skipped that first zealot, he has no tanking whatsoever, and the stalker is going to get wasted. But the other mistake that he makes, and this is something that I talked about once again, you want to scout with that probe. You want to keep the probe around his base and be poking up there. If that probe dies, who cares? It's just a probe. But if you lose this stalker by any reason, you are making a huge mistake. So Huck is going to go ahead and drop his Nexus now that he's denied scouting. He's going to start a sentry, so this is basically the same as what we were doing, except for he placed his pylon in a different spot, no big deal. Nexus went down at pretty much the same time, maybe just a tad earlier. But he did again skip his zealot, and he's scouting with this stalker to see what he can do. He's getting a little greedy, and watch what happens to Huck if he gets too greedy here. He's going to run his stalker up the ramp here. A lot of people like to scout like this. And then, yeah, oh, wait, no, oh, and yeah, that stalker's going to die. And, yeah, you just wasted your stalker for no reason. So, now that stalker doesn't fully die, but the fact of the matter is that he could have easily lost that stalker if there was a marauder here with slow. And he's not playing to the possibilities of what a Terran player can do. Right now, Huck does not have anything else coming out. He's got a second sentry coming out on the way. And look how late his 2 gateways are. He did not go pylon, gate, gate before starting up probes again. He went Nexus, pylon, gateway. He started a sentry. He's over here microing his stalker or whatever. And his gateways were late, and this is going to kill him. So I cannot stress enough how tight you have to keep everything. Because look, now what does Huck even have at his base? He has a sentry that's getting wasted by marauders. He has a stalker that has like no health. He does not have a zealot that could take a lot of damage from these 2 marauders. I mean, it takes 16 shots to kill these marauders if you have those out. If you had something else out, you could have, at the very minimum, at least buy some time. But all of a sudden, Huck is being pressured. His gateways aren't ready, even though, look, our gateways were ready at 6:15 on the other replay. His aren't. This is because he's getting too greedy. So if your gateways are late, if you skip your zealot, if you go out and take too much damage or lose your stalker, you're dead. There's just no reason not to do any of that. It's just pros make these kinds of mistakes because they get greedy. They want to get an edge wherever they can, and they might die to something stupid like this. And you don't want to die to stupid stuff like this on the ladder. So I cannot stress how important getting all this stuff down in the order that I said that you need to get it down. You need to get everything out. You need to have your Zealot and Stalker ready at 26 supply. You need to be at 22 probes because that's going to make up the rest of your 26. Nexus, Pylon, 2 gates immediately. You cannot waste any time, and you cannot skip a Zealot. You cannot scout with your Stalker. You cannot do any of that because you don't know what he's doing. I guess sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't. If you don't know what he's doing and he does something like this, you're just going to die to that. And there's no reason to die because you got greedy. So if you want to read all this stuff in text, I have more replays that you can watch based upon, different situations that I get myself into on the ladder. I play against master level Terrans, so on the North American server, which isn't the greatest competition, but the fact that you can compare replays of mine and just check timings and compare it with pro players and see where pro players fail and I do not. It's a pretty big difference. And again, I'm not better than Huck. I'm not better than any pro, and I'm not saying anything like that. But pros do make mistakes, and they make mistakes that can easily be avoided if they just run their build like it's supposed to be ran. So I think that's enough that needs to be said about this guide. I hope this guide or video helped you out on this build, and I have a lot to say about this build because Protoss players have told me many times that this build just doesn't hold stuff like 2 racks and 3 racks pressure. It will hold any barracks pressure if you have competent unit control, if you know what you're doing, if you target down Marauders with your Stalkers, if you let your Zealots tank damage, if you use your sentries for Guardian Shield, all that stuff, you will be just fine. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to talk about this. If you own a copy of Starcraft, you can go onto the battle.net thread that I made about this build as well and talk to me about it all you want. Tell me what problems you're having and I'll be more than happy to answer it. But the link to the thread is down in the comments if you want to check that out. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm sorry, I'm usually a pretty not too serious guy, but this particularly just bugs me, and I hate it when people say this build doesn't work. It only doesn't work if you don't run it correctly. So this is the right way to run it. Hopefully you guys have some success with it. I'll see you guys on the next broadcast. Until then, take it easy and go out there and have some fun.